They said you were too soft, too quiet, too strange. You walked into rooms like a whisper, and they mistook it for weakness. But what they never saw was how loud the war was inside you. You wore silence like armor, not because you had nothing to say, but because no one ever listened without turning your truth into shame. You weren't born broken. You were just born different. And in a world that celebrates noise and pretends at perfection, your pain was too raw, too honest, too real. So they named it weakness, and you believed them. You believed them when they said you were lazy, not knowing your bones were heavy with the weight of invisible battles. You believed them when they said, get over it, as if trauma had an expiration date. You believed them when they looked at your tears like sin, not knowing they came from a heart that had bled too long and still kept beating. No one asked where you were bleeding from. No one cared about the wounds under your smile. They wanted you fixed, not felt, useful, not understood. So you became what they wanted, or tried to. You put on masks, learned how to nod when you wanted to scream, how to laugh when you wanted to collapse. You wore fake strength like a rented suit, stiff, uncomfortable, never quite fitting. And all the while, you told yourself, this must be what it means to be strong. But that was the first lie. They told you strength meant never breaking, never needing, never crying. They taught you to chase numbness, not healing, to pretend, not to process. They built temples to the myth of control, and every time you cracked under the pressure, they held up your pieces like proof of your failure. But they never saw the weight you carried. They never asked who dropped it on you. There were nights. You remember them, when the ceiling stared back at you like it had answers. Nights when breathing felt like an act of rebellion. Nights when you wondered if anyone would miss you, and hated yourself for even wondering. You weren't weak. You were surviving, quietly, brutally, bravely. But survival isn't always beautiful. Sometimes it's a messy, desperate clinging. Sometimes it's lying to everyone you love just to get through the day. Sometimes it's crying in a locked bathroom and wiping your tears before anyone sees. Because God forbid they call you dramatic. God forbid they call you fragile. So you hid it, all of it. You buried your softness under sarcasm. You covered your fear with anger. You smiled like it was a duty. And every time someone said, you're so strong, you felt like a fraud. Because inside, you were screaming, bleeding, begging for someone to see you without the mask. But they didn't, because they never wanted to. Because your pain made them uncomfortable. And your power scared them. So they told you it didn't exist, that you were broken, that you needed fixing. And when you couldn't be fixed, they called you weak. But they lied. They lied to your face with polished smiles and empty advice. They dressed judgment as concern, control as care. And you, in your innocence, your desperation, you swallowed every word like poison wrapped in praise. You see now, don't you? It wasn't that you failed to be strong. It's that their definition of strength was hollow, rigid, mechanical. They worshipped masks. They feared feeling. They had no language for people like you. But you were never meant to be a statue. You were meant to be a storm, a force, a soul carved by sorrow and fire. And the truth is, every time they told you to toughen up, what they really meant was become more like us, less human. Every time they mocked your tears, what they really feared was the reflection of their own numbness, because your vulnerability made them confront their own emptiness, and your softness reminded them of everything they'd lost. So they tried to crush you, but they couldn't, because even when you bent, even when you shattered, even when you fell to your knees and begged the darkness to take you, you got back up, maybe not right away, maybe not cleanly, but slowly, quietly, like the roots of a tree breaking through stone. They called it weakness, but it was power in disguise. You didn't fall apart. You were torn, piece by hands that claimed to love you, by voices that should protected you, by days that dragged like chains and nights that didn't end with sleep, only silence. But here's the truth they never told you. You didn't collapse because you were weak. You shattered because someone ripped through you. There was a moment, wasn't there? A moment you remember with blurred eyes and clenched fists, when something broke. Maybe it was a lie you caught in someone's eyes. Maybe it was the day someone walked away and never looked back. Maybe it was a scream caught in your throat that no one heard. But it happened. And from that point on, you weren't the same. They called it a breakdown. You called it shame. But what it really was destruction by design. Not by your hands, but by forces outside of you. Trauma isn't loud. It's not always sirens and screaming. Sometimes it's a parent who looks through you. Sometimes it's the friend who betrayed you and still acted like you were the problem. Sometimes it's the way the world taught you to sit still, be quiet, stop needing. And slowly your voice shrunk, your spine bent, your light dimmed, until you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the reflection, until you believed the lie that you were the broken one. But no, you weren't born broken. You were born whole, then wounded. Pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. And that whisper, that slow, slippery, cruel voice, starts to sound like your own. That's how it begins. The villain enters quietly. No cape, no mask, just a tone, a phrase, a pattern. Pain isn't just something that happened to you. It became someone. It put its arms around you and said, "I'm all you've got now." It wore your skin like a costume. It walked you into rooms and made you afraid to speak. It stood in front of your dreams and told you, not for you. It convinced you that you were difficult to love, too much to handle, destined to fail. But pain lied. Pain is clever like that. It doesn't need to destroy you in one blow. It just needs to make you forget who you are. It doesn't burn everything to ash. It just covers the mirror. It just makes you doubt the fire. And slowly, over time, you stopped showing up as you. You started performing, adjusting, shrinking, hiding the parts that made people uncomfortable, smiling when you wanted to scream, apologizing for being alive. But listen to me, the breaking wasn't your fault. The betrayal wasn't because you weren't enough. The abandonment wasn't proof of your unworthiness. They failed to love you. They failed to see you. They tore you, but you blamed yourself for bleeding. That's how deep the lie ran. You thought, if I were better, they wouldn't have left. If I were stronger, this wouldn't hurt so much. If I were lovable, they wouldn't have broken me. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if you were hurt because you loved deeply? Because you cared more than most? Because your spirit was soft in a world that punishes softness? What if they left because they couldn't handle the weight of your light? What if the world broke you because it didn't know what to do with someone like you? Let that sink in. You weren't fragile. You were real. You weren't lost. You were disoriented by betrayal. You weren't collapsing. You were transforming. See, breaking isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's excavation. Sometimes it's the earthquake that reveals the gold underneath the surface. Sometimes it's the cracking open of a soul that has been sealed shut for too long. You weren't falling apart. You were coming undone, so you could rebuild yourself without their fingerprints on your identity. There's a story no one told you that sometimes survival looks like sobbing in the dark. Sometimes healing looks like disappearing. Sometimes power looks like crawling when you want to quit. But none of that is weakness. It's war. It's you fighting for your life in silence. It's you waging a quiet revolution inside your chest. You didn't break. You were broken into by pain, by people, by the world. But here you are, still breathing, still rising, still becoming. And that is not weakness. That is undeniable proof of your power. They mistook your silence for surrender, but silence is not always the sound of defeat. Sometimes silence is sacred, a pause between battles, a breath before the strike, a lion crouching low not because it's scared, but because it's about to leap. You weren't quiet because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because no one had earned your voice. You were silent because your truth was still sharpening itself in the dark. Let them talk. Let them assume. Let them mock what they cannot comprehend. Because you were never lost. You were loading. People fear what they can't label. And silence? It doesn't come with a script. It doesn't give them comfort. It forces them to guess, and that terrifies them. So they called you passive, dismissed, ignored. Too quiet, they said. But inside you, a war was unfolding, a revolution no one could see, because power doesn't always announce itself with noise. It builds in shadows. It gathers in stillness, like a storm far beyond the horizon. You can't hear it yet, but you can feel it. There were days you disappeared, slipped into yourself like a cave. They thought you were giving up, but what they never knew was that you were healing, strategizing, sharpening the pieces of yourself that had dulled in their chaos. You weren't running. You were retreating with purpose, like a general before the final charge, like a phoenix sitting still inside the ashes, knowing exactly what's coming next. And that's what they couldn't understand. You don't burn loud. You burn long. You let your silence speak louder than their noise, because you know those who scream the most are often the most unsure, but those who hold still in the fire, those are the ones worth fearing. You kept your power wrapped in stillness, not because it wasn't ready, but because you were deciding where to aim it. The cave is not a coffin. It is a cocoon. The dark is not your enemy. It is your incubator. Yes, the world pushed you to speak before your voice was ready, to rise before your legs had healed, to perform strength instead of building it. But you had the courage to say no. You disappeared, not to fade, but to forge. And in that silence, you met yourself again. Not the version they named, not the broken mirror they handed you, but the real you, the one with quiet fire and thunder in their lungs. So let them wonder, let them gossip, let them whisper about the one who walked away. Because when you return, you won't return as who they knew. You'll return as something else entirely. Not louder, not angrier, but undeniably, unshakably powerful. They thought silence meant empty, but yours was full of rage, of light, of memory, of clarity. They thought stillness meant frozen, but you were a volcano beneath ice. You were pressure building in stone. You were a calm surface hiding tectonic power. You were never out of the fight. You were simply studying the battlefield. And now your roar is almost ready. Now your truth has weight. Now your silence has edge. You didn't go quiet because you were defeated. You went quiet because the next version of you, the real version, needed time to assemble. So, no, you weren't weak in your quiet. You were strategic, intentional, and soon inevitable. They never saw the fire, not because it wasn't there, but because you buried it deep, where no one could touch it, where no one could steal it, where even you sometimes forgot it existed. You were never numb. You were protecting the flame. You didn't scream when they hurt you, not because you weren't in pain, but because you knew how sacred your voice was. You didn't strike back, not because you didn't feel the rage boiling beneath your skin, but because you knew the difference between reaction and revenge. You were quiet, but you were burning. Inside you lived an entire world of heat, memories that scorched, betrayals that blistered, anger like thunder behind a locked jaw. But you kept it in. You learned to wear your rage like armor, invisible, heavy. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You forgave too early, too often, because you weren't ready to start a war. Not because you didn't know how. You buried your fire because you had to. Because some of the rooms you were trapped in, they would have called it too much, overreacting, unreasonable. They would have punished you for trying to survive. So you learned to store it, to hide your fury behind soft words, to fold your grief into neat boxes labeled "not now," to turn your passion into silence so no one would see you shaking. And maybe, just maybe, you started to believe that the fire was gone, but it wasn't. It never was. Your anger, it's not destruction, it's instruction. It tells you what mattered. It tells you what was violated, what deserved defending. And your grief, it's not weakness. It's love with nowhere to go. It's all the pieces of you someone walked away from, and the proof that your heart was never empty. They told you to calm down, to stay small, to be polite, because your intensity scared them, because your depth forced them to confront their own shallowness, because your fire made their cold hearts feel exposed. So you dimmed yourself. But hear me now. What you buried isn't dead. What you locked away isn't lost. Your rage, your passion, your grief, your desire, they've been waiting, not dying, sharpening. This wasn't suppression. This was storage. This was choosing not to burn the wrong house down. This was the storm learning to hold itself. You didn't fight back because the moment wasn't right, because you hadn't rebuilt your armor yet, because your heart was still too raw to hold a sword, not because you weren't a warrior. The world looked at your stillness and said powerless, but still water runs deep. And still fire? It melts steel when it's ready. You were never weak. You were just strategic with your fire. You saved it for a moment when your roar would matter. You saved it for the day when you wouldn't burn yourself trying to light someone else's path. You saved it for you. And that moment, it's coming. You can feel it now, can't you? That pulse in your chest, that weight behind your words, that old version of you cracking, groaning, peeling away. You didn't survive all this pain to stay silent forever. You didn't store all this heat to die cold. You're the match. You're the fuse. You're the inferno they swore didn't exist. And soon, very soon, you will rise, not in whispers, but in wild, unapologetic flame. It didn't come with claws. It didn't come with blood. It came in the shape of a whisper, wearing your voice like a mask. That's how fear works. It never had to shout. It just had to sound familiar. Sound like you. It crept in through cracked windows and open wounds, not as a monster, but as a suggestion. Soft, reasonable, logical. You can't do that. You'll fail again. No one wants to hear you. Stay where it's safe. Fear never looked like the villain. It looked like a parent just trying to protect you. It looked like that teacher who said you weren't ready. It looked like that friend who said, don't get your hopes up. It wore faces you trusted. But it was never love. It was never truth. It was always fear. Wearing masks, writing scripts in your mind, directing the theater of your self-doubt. And it was clever. It didn't tell you you'd fail. It said, what if you fail? Just a seed. Just enough to make your chest tighten. Just enough to make you stay still. Because fear doesn't need to destroy you. It just needs to pause you. It just needs to keep you from moving, from risking, from reaching. It made your comfort zone feel like safety, but it was a cage with velvet walls, a prison dressed as a sanctuary. And you didn't even realize the door was locked from the inside. You thought you were being smart, being realistic, but really, you were being ruled. Not by truth, not by fact, but by a voice you didn't even realize wasn't yours. Fear is the most gifted impersonator you've ever met. It mimics your logic. It imitates your conscience. It hides inside common sense. But look closer, and you'll see. Every time you hesitated, every time you held back your power, it was there, standing in the doorway, smiling, saying, let's not do this right now. And you listened, not because you were weak, but because fear is convincing. It knows your scars. It knows your past. It knows exactly what to replay when you try to rise. It didn't scream, you're worthless. It whispered, remember the last time you tried? It didn't yell, you'll be alone. It whispered, you're already too much. That's how it wins, by sounding like memory, by calling itself caution, by hiding behind your wounds. But here's what fear never expected, that you would wake up, that one day you would sit in the silence, look it in the eye, and realize it's not your voice, it's not your truth, it's not your identity. Fear has been squatting in your mind like a parasite. It's been wearing your voice like a stolen coat. And now, you're starting to recognize the fit is off, because deep beneath the fear, beneath the shaking hands and pounding heart, there is something fear cannot touch. Your fire. It can fog your mind. It can freeze your body, but it cannot touch your soul. That part of you, that ancient part, that part made of lightning and grit and breath and bone. Fear can't reach that. And maybe, just maybe, You're starting to feel it now. That flicker, that heat, that resistance. You're not just listening anymore. You're questioning. You're asking, who told me that? Who benefits from my silence? Whose fear am I carrying? And that's how fear begins to fall. Not with a scream, but with a decision, a refusal, a single quiet, trembling no. And once you say it, the masks begin to slip. The whispers get desperate. The cage starts to rattle, because fear knows. If you ever really look it in the face, you'll see it was hollow all along. It had no fangs, no claws, no spine, just echoes, just memory, just old stories told one too many times. And now, you're rewriting them. You were never meant to live on your knees, not in apology, not in fear, not in survival mode. You were not born to shrink into the background of your own story. You were not crafted from stars and storms, just to be someone's stepping stone. You are not here to endure endlessly. You are not here just to cope. You are not here to manage pain like a quiet accountant of suffering. You are here to rise like fire that remembers it once was lightning, to rise like stone that remembers it once shook mountains, to rise like a phoenix whose wings were never lost, just hidden beneath the ash. The world tried to name you victim, to reduce your soul to a headline, to pin you to your pain like a label stitched to your skin. But you were never meant to be defined by what broke you. You were meant to become through it, to forge, to sharpen, to evolve. They don't know what it took to still be here, to breathe, to hope, to get out of bed on days when gravity felt personal. That strength? That's not ordinary. That's legendary. You're not weak. You're not a sob story. You're a survival epic still unfolding. You are unbroken bone. You are battlefield muscle. You are proof that not everything that bleeds stays down. Say it out loud if you have to. Let your voice hear the sound of its own rebellion. I am not here to survive. I am here to rise. Let it become a mantra, a rhythm, a battle cry in your blood. Because now, the shift begins. No more waiting for permission. No more apologizing for how deeply you feel, how hard you fight, how loud your silence was. No more sitting in rooms where your power makes people uncomfortable, because you were never meant to be palatable. You were meant to be undeniable. This is your return. This is your ascent. This is your awakening, and it doesn't come with fanfare. It comes with fire. They told you to chase it, told you strength lived out there, in the voice of someone louder, in the approval of someone colder, in the image of someone who never bled like you did. They told you to search in medals, in praise, in perfection, and so you did. You ran, you chased, you reached for things that tasted like power, but left your soul starving. You were taught to doubt your softness, to question your empathy, to silence your intuition. Because power, they said, looks like control, like certainty, like stone. But you were never stone. You were lightning wrapped in skin. You were tremor hiding in quiet bones. You were truth that burned too bright for their lies to sit beside. What they called weakness. Your sensitivity, your emotions, your ache to understand people wasn't a flaw. It was evidence. Evidence that your spirit could feel the tremors before the world admitted there was an earthquake. You saw what they ignored. You heard what they silenced. You felt what they numbed. And for that, they called you fragile. But you were never fragile. You were just awake in a sleeping world. And now that world has no hold on you, because you've stopped asking for permission, stopped waiting for affirmation. You've turned inward, and for the first time, you hear it. That thunder rising from your chest. That heartbeat not like a whisper, but like war drums echoing through your ribs. Your blood hums with a power you forgot you carried. Your lungs feel like engines, ready to scream life into the world. You don't need a sword. You don't need a title. You are not waiting to become powerful. You are the weapon. You were always the storm. And now the lightning is remembering its name. Enough bowing to ghosts. Enough apologizing for surviving. Enough wearing chains and calling it peace. This is where it ends. The silence, the shrinking, the waiting. You've waited long enough for someone to see you, for someone to save you. for someone to say, now you're ready. But you were never meant to be discovered. You were meant to detonate. This moment right here is not the beginning of your rise. It is the explosion that proves you were rising all along. Every moment you held back your scream, that was power being forged. Every step you walked alone, that was thunder learning how to march. Every tear you buried in your pillow, that was molten strength, sharpening its edge in secret. They thought you were weak because you didn't fight back. You weren't weak. You were waiting, storing, loading. And now you are fire looking for something to burn. So stand. Yes, stand. Don't flinch. Don't bow. Don't hesitate. Stand for every version of you that cried and kept walking. Stand for the silence they mistook as surrender. Stand for the heart that broke but still beat. Let your shoulders rise like mountains returning from slumber. Let your spine remember it was carved by storms. Let your eyes reflect the fury of someone who remembers who they are. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to fit in. You are not here to dim your fire so others can feel comfortable in their shadows. You are here to burn. Burn away the lies they fed you. Burn down the altars where you sacrificed your worth. Burn the masks, the chains, the walls. This is not a request. This is a rally cry. Stand, speak, burn, build. Speak with the voice they told you was too much. Speak with the truth they said would make you enemies. Speak, because your silence was a prison and your words are hammers. And when the dust settles, don't look around for permission. You are the permission. You are the permission to rise, to lead, to love yourself fiercely, to take up space like the galaxy carved a seat just for you. This is not transformation. This is revelation. You are not becoming something new. You are finally unleashing what you've always been. They thought you were ashes, scattered, spent, smothered. They thought the fire had left you, but they never looked closely enough, because even in your darkest moments, you glowed, not with flames they could see, but with the spark they never understood. You weren't the aftermath. You were the origin. You were the match. And now, the world sees it. You're no longer waiting for light to find you. You've realized you are the light. You don't search for warmth. You are the fire that can thaw someone else's winter. You don't chase rescue. You are the storm that sweeps the wreckage and builds new ground. Because what broke you forged you. Not broken, forged. Every time the world struck you down, it was another hammer on the anvil, another spark, another piece of steel sharpened by suffering. You weren't falling apart. You were being shaped into something unbreakable. Look in the mirror now. No shame, no apologies, no disguises. This is the face of someone who didn't just survive, but redefined what survival looks like. This is the soul of someone who can walk into any fire and not fear being burned, because they are the blaze. They told you to be careful, to stay small, to not scare people with how much you feel, how much you know, how much you radiate. But careful never saved you. Silence never healed you. You weren't made to tiptoe through life. You were made to set things ablaze, to light torches for the ones behind you, to carry flame in both hands and say, "Follow me. I've walked through hell, and I remember the way out." You are no longer the hunted. You are the storm. You are no longer the broken. You are the forge. You are no longer the beggar of light. You are the sun breaking over a battlefield. And from this moment forward, the world no longer gets the shadowed version of you. They get the blaze.